So welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast, and it's my absolute delight to have my dear friend and colleague and, I don't know, what are you? Teacher and mentor on some days, and I don't know what, but Shane McDermott. It's a joy to have you.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
So we started a conversation that was really fascinating about time, and you talked about linear time and you talked about cyclical time, and you had your time beads in a strip of repeating sequences, and then you had us imagining that it was in a circle. So where do we go from there, and how does that expand practically?
Yeah. So part of this is informed through my work of biogeometry with Ibrahim Karim. And I'll talk about resonant time. He calls it stack time, but essentially we're pointing to the same thing. But I give it some nuances that aren't present in biogeometry. But here's the thing that we have to be very mindful of here. This can be purely conceptual, but as I take us through this exploration, I'm going to invite each of us to recognize how these three different dimensions of time and space show up in our direct experience in our day-to-day lived reality. Because if it doesn't land in our direct experience, then it's information in, information out, and it's utterly useless.
Yeah, it's an intellectual process, right? And it doesn't live in that present time.
Yeah, exactly. So as I walk us through these three different dimensions of space and time, and I describe the qualities, I want you as the listeners to really start to recognize how these different dimensions show up in your day-to-day lived reality, in your relationships, in your work, in your spiritual experiences, in your creative processes, in your relationship to food and sleep and time in nature. It shows up everywhere. But typically, a lot of people don't understand these three dimensions, so they don't recognize the nuanced distinction in their own experience. So use this as an invitation to recognize and reclaim these. These are really capacities of subtle shifts in our body-mind consciousness to access very, very different relationships with both time and space. And the important thing to recognize is that all three of these dimensions are present. It's an all at once kind of relationship to time and space. What we can do through practice is work with foreground, background. And what I mean by that, all three are present, and there's a choice point. What dimension of space-time do we actually need to bring to the foreground and allow the other two to move to the background? And when and how can that shift? Consciously, through choice. That's ultimately the best practice, and best opportunity is to have choice of how we interact and engage with both time and space. So going back to the metaphor, the analogy I was using of the mala beads, and we'll imagine a string of 100 beads with 10 sets of 10 repeating colors.
Each one's different within the 10, but each set of 10 is the same in the same order, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we'll say for this exploration, the string is time, the beads are space. And each bead in this configuration would represent 1 year of our life. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're using this metaphor or experiment, you can configure that different however you want. It could be 1 day of our lives. So configure it in a way that works for you. Okay. So the first relationship to time and space is what we'll call linear or sequenced or chronological space-time, where the different spaces of our lives, the different years of our lives are strung together in a linear perception of time. That's the string, right? And once a year has passed, it's gone. It's history. Okay. And regardless of how beautiful it was or how challenging it was, it's history. It's back in time, literally. Okay. This is the prominent way that we perceive time and space. It's what we've been conditioned through our education system, through our social constructs, through our societal rules and responsibilities of how we engage in our work, our family. It's sequenced very linear, chronological. What's important to recognize about this dimension of time and space is in this linear perception of time and space, space is infinite, time is finite.
So they're at odds with each other.
Yes, and you'll see how that changes. So in linear space-time, space is infinite, time is finite. This is really important. So in this infinite space that we can occupy of our lives through the time that we have on this planet, to move from this space to that space, say a future goal, an aspiration, a desire, the best and really only way to move from this space to that space is to move quickly. Because we have a finite amount of time. And if we want to occupy all the spaces of our desires, our goals, our accomplishments, to achieve the agenda for our life, the primary strategy is velocity. We need to move quicker.
So can I ask you a question in that point? That's where the idea of a bucket list comes in. You have a list of things. By definition, you want them done.
Which are spaces. Consider those spaces.
Yeah. So your bucket list, say it's to travel around the world. So you almost, you better get a wiggle on because you don't know how long you've got. Therefore, the quicker you do that, I don't mean you have to do it in a hurry, but you have to be mindful that you've got a time constraint because time available to you while it's unknown is finite.
Yes. Yes. That's a really good way to frame it, Joe, because a bucket list, think about a bucket list. It's infinite what could go on a bucket list, right? It really is.
You should see mine. Oh my God, they're concertinaed. Mine are folded because the fan I can't fit them all on. But anyway, go on.
Exactly. So each bucket list item, consider that a unique container of space. And we could have dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions of them. And we've got a limited amount of time. So how are you going to accomplish those things? As quickly as possible.
Well, you actually get to a point where you try and do them virtually. I mean, a perfect example of that is I have some art courses that I'm absolutely dying to complete, and I've bought them, and they're online and they're sitting there, and I've got lifetime access to them. And every time I look at them, it's like, oh God, I haven't got a time window that I can fan out to do it. And they're sitting there screaming at me, calling me. I'm longing to dance with them. And yet I think, no, this job I have to do. I have to get this completed by the deadline of tomorrow. Tomorrow's Monday. We've got a live coaching call. I've got to be with my students. So I've got to read their emails and go through their questions and make sure I've prepared myself for that, because that's like top of the list. And yet the other thing's calling me and the time is not apparently available. So it goes in the maybe someday bucket list when.
Yes.
So that's a perfect example of what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when we're in this perception of time and space and we miss a perceived opportunity to check that bucket list item off, we feel like a loss. Okay. Like we failed to take advantage of that opportunity. And then it gets moved down the string
And
to
it's
history.
incomplete. That's the other thing. It remains incomplete. It remains
Exactly.
incomplete and an incompletable longing. And then you
Yes,
actually beat yourself up because you didn't, I looked after my kids. I looked after my parents. I took care of that emergency. I managed that emergency. But what about me?
exactly. Yes, exactly. And so you're right. It's an energetic longing. And this is where our energy and our presence gets displaced into history because it remains unfinished. And anything that remains unfinished owns a part of our energy. It's an energetic circuit that's plugged into a missed opportunity, a lost opportunity, something we didn't complete, something that's unfinished. It takes part of our life and plugs it into the past.
Absolutely.
So, in this linear relationship of time and space, where spaces are infinite, we could have any number of experiences in this life, and each experience is a distinct space, but we've got finite amount of time. So how much of your history is your life force plugged into of unfinished, whether it's a missed opportunity or an unhealed trauma or something that happened that you can't forgive? All of that is life force plugged into the spaces of our history.
Got it. So tell me something. And if it's an aside, we'll talk about it later. I don't want to disappear down a rabbit hole. But I'm looking at, I've just moved house. And one of the things I had to do was dismantle my book collection.
Yeah.
My 1,000 book collection that I've collected over decades. And I mean, I've been a bookworm since I was born. My mother said I was reading before I was playing with teddy bears. She said, you just hugged books. You just loved them. I just, and I write them and I read them and they mean something to me. And I'm wondering, I look at the shelves and as I went through each one, thinking, I don't know if I want you to be in my new home.
Mm.
I don't know if the new space has room for you.
Yeah.
It was an emotional deal.
I'll
Seriously.
bet it was. I know. I've gone through it.
Yeah. Yeah, you have, God bless you. And I actually thought, Shane's been through this. It's my turn. And yet it wasn't that I didn't love and appreciate each book. And God knows, my book came out yesterday and the messages I've had have just been so heartwarming. I'm so deeply grateful to everybody that actually wrote, well done, congratulations. I'm so thrilled. I can't wait. Mine's just arrived. The excitement that you've poured your heart and soul. It's the value of what the author put into creating the book. And I respect that in every book I read, even if I don't like it personally, or it's not my subject, or to me, it's bonkers. I still have this huge respect for the heart and soul that's been poured into it. So
Yep.
let's use the time space thing. Those books are taking up space on my shelf, which I no longer have. But somehow the knowledge in them is bound to those pages. And
Mm-hmm.
then you've got this time thing that I literally can't read all the books I've collected. It's not possible. I could be sitting here probably, I'd have to be 140 to get to them all. So I'm not going to read them, right? So they're going to be incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
So is this part of this process where I could very practically apply this idea and pick up the book and thank you, I love you, peace, be still. Thank you for the grace in my life. But as I go to give it away, there's a feeling that I'm giving that knowledge away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is absolutely related.
Okay.
So let's expand this a little bit. Not only space and time, but learning and listening can parallel these three dimensions. In this exploration, you would also have three ways of learning and listening. So books are interesting. I've gone through this, Joe. It was a painful two-step process for me. As I moved, the gypsy lifestyle I've had. I had a collection of over 400 books. and I loved them. I still love them. They're no longer with me, but I love what they offered me. And I needed to get rid of them. But there was a part of me that believed I had to have the book in order to access that intelligence or information. There was a belief in this linear time-bound reality that I needed the book. And without it, I was sort of deficient in some way. So there was a dependency on the book.
Hmm.
And what I found, the book was binding me to a particular belief about how to access the intelligence. And as soon as I started to let the books go, I came into a different relationship with that intelligence. It no longer became a bound referent point on my shelf. It became part of a field of intelligence that is always already present and available. So the information and intelligence became available in a very dynamic field that allowed me to access it and learn it and understand it in a much more integrated way. Because all the books are very discrete packages of intelligence that are very differentiated.
Mhm.
In reality, the billions of books that have been written have been accessed through one field.
Absolutely.
So that's the opportunity to reconnect to the one unified field of intelligence in which all information resides. And by releasing these discrete packages of information and intelligence, that ended up in the way I was understanding and working with the information in a very sequenced way. They were very disintegrated. The information was very disintegrated. When I got rid of the books and came into a different relationship of time and space with them, all the discrete packages of information and intelligence that each book represented could then become unified in an integrated field of intelligence. And this is a big deal because so much of the way we've been educated is in this sequenced linear space-time dimension, that even how books are written, your writing actually transcends this in so many ways, but a lot of the way most books are written is a very sequenced organization of chronological order and sequenced step-by-step processes or practices. It's a journey from here to there, and that creates time. So we start to condition our minds, our bodies, our nervous system to think of information being very linear, sequenced, chronologically ordered. And that's how most books are written.
It's how our bucket is written.
Yeah, it's how our bucket list is written. It's how our to-do lists are written.
It's how our diaries and our journals are written.
Yeah, it's how we develop business. It's how we develop relationships, how we develop financial wealth, how we get fit. It's insidious. It rules how we perceive reality. Then that becomes that certainty and habit and addiction to linear space-time is what we project onto the screen of reality. And that's what it shows us. That's the only relationship to time and space.
So I know, because I know you're not making this wrong. You're simply distinguishing it as a foundation of assumption.
Yeah.
And you're suggesting that that assumption can, let's say can, disintegrate.
It comes back to the foreground background thing. This has become such a crystallized, reified permanent foreground structure of how we perceive time and space and ourselves and reality and everyone else in reality, that it becomes a fixation. It's not wrong. It's real, but it's true, but very partial.
Okay, I love this. So what you're saying is, because you just opened something for me, you opened a portal for me. If we don't realize we're addicted to an idea as distinct from it's real, what you're saying then is where we have ideas of aging, let's take that each decade represents a way of being, roughly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it should. A child, an adolescent, a young adult, someone in their 20s, someone in their 30s, somewhere in their 40s. And now we're in an age where we're starting saying things like, oh, 60 is the new 40. And now we have people like, God bless her, Jane Fonda, who's out there in her 80s, and Cher, who's performing in whatever age she's at. I'm not quite sure, but that it's no longer okay to be ageist.
Yeah.
In the same way. So what that encourages me to think is that while we can hold different qualities of respect for each age group, for each threshold of maturity, we can consider it as something that we're actually not bound by.
Yes, exactly. This is just one dimension of our human experience. We are not only multi-dimensional beings, we're omni-dimensional beings, meaning we inhabit multi-dimensions all at once. The other thing about sort of linear space-time perception is that it reduces everything to an either or. It's either this or that. It can't coexist. When we come into unified consciousness or omnidimensional presence, they're all present. It's an all at once kind of consciousness. Then we have choice of, do we want this fixation and habit and addiction to linear chronological space-time to be the only dimension we see? That's either or. Space-time is linear. That's it. That's all there is. You're born, you have your experiences, and you die, and that's all. So yes, through this exploration, I'm going to help us understand how we can inhabit all three all at once and have choice of what is foreground, what is background.
Without being troubled. So let's go. We had one, so we've now spent like 20 something minutes talking about the first of three, the linear one, in which space is infinite and time is finite. Is that correct? Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've only got a certain amount of time to do all my courses or fill in my bucket list. And then I'm going to age and time is going to catch up with me. And I may or may not get my bucket list done. And we're addicted to that story because it sells movies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's the first one. So what's the next one?
So before we go to the next one, because I had also suggested that learning and listening can show up distinctly in these three phases. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
The learning process in linear space-time is basically how we've been educated. Okay. Everyone has a deeply embodied understanding and remembering of how they were educated. It's very sequential. It's very chronologically ordered. It's very step processed in how it's structured. Information is structured, and it's information. It's not intelligence. It's information to be memorized and sort of stored in our database. And therefore, if we want to reenact that knowledge, we need to go through the step-by-step sequencing and reorganization of it in order to have that manifest into how we build our businesses, how we exercise, how we learn, how we do yoga. It's everything.
We literally do the math, don't we? You count the number of breaths you do. You count the number of minutes you do a pose. You count swimming strokes per length. It's how we assess It's how we measure health. I mean, you go to
Yep.
the doctor and they don't look at you. They look at the X-ray. They look at the data, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Stats, whatever. Yeah,
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up because the information is structured in a quantitative way,
exactly. Yeah,
not a qualitative way.
yeah.
Everything is reduced to metrics.
Absolutely. No, I get that. And usefully so, because it's
Yeah.
really lovely to learn those metrics. But now
Yep.
I've noticed this when I see people wearing these watches or these rings that tell them on their phone what their metrics are. And I was having a fascinating conversation with someone last week, and he said, "Oh, well, I've had my DNA tested, and I know that if I have those supplements to match that DNA." And he said, so if I do the movement and I just looked at him and I went, "Are you kidding me?" And he said, "What?"
That's such a good example.
He
That's
said, "What?"
great.
He said, "What? Are you laughing at me?" I said, "No, I'm not laughing at you, my darling." I said, "My heart is absolutely breaking for you." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "If anyone had sussed that equation, we'd all be alive forever."
Yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
"I am a walking interruption of that equation." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I've been teaching yoga for freaking years. I do it. I do the meditation. I was 7 years old when I met my first yoga teacher. I was 14 when I learned transcendental meditation. I've been meditating and mantraing and blah, blah, blah. I'm a yoga therapist." I said, "I've done all of it. I've done all of it. And I get a diagnosis of breast cancer. Did I not do it properly? Did I eat the wrong meat? Did I not eat meat? Did I eat the right lentils? Did I not eat what? No, it's not. I said, my darling, it's not an equation. I said, what do you love doing?" And he said, "Well, I love running and I love dancing." And I said, "Well, you can't measure the amount of running and the amount of dancing according to the supplements that you're taking against the gauge of the way your sleep goes on your watch that you're wearing that tells you your DNA results of what." I said, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
And he's
Yeah.
just and we're getting like that. Everybody's running around with a phone. Nobody knows their natural body cycle. The women and their menstrual cycle. It's all on an app.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
yeah,
It's data driven.
it's data driven. Well, no, it's data obsessed actually, and it's data.
Yes.
It's overridden. It's not. I understand data driven. I absolutely love it when somebody plugged me into a machine and said, "Joe, you need to calm the hell down right now because you need to calm down." Great. I didn't need the machine to tell me, but when I saw it, it was like, holy Moses, I need to calm down because I'm going to die in a minute if I don't breathe. He said, I want you in an ECG now." I said, "It's all right. Give me an hour in the waiting room." I said, "I'll be fine." Of course, by the time they got me on the ECG, I'd breathed my way in, as you would expect.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's an example of anything, but it's helpful because it got me through the right department in the hospital, but it's not, I don't think it's the foundation of how we can conduct our lives.
Yeah. No, that's a really good example. And I invite each of us to recognize our own example of that when we've got caught in these spirals, these vortexes.
Mm.
Because when we're in that mode of perception, yes, our reality becomes very quantitative.
Yeah.
That how I exercise, how I feel is informed by the data. I look for the data to tell me how I'm actually feeling,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
It comes in charge. There's no choice.
so
Yeah.
yes, this is the listening aspect. What are we listening for? Well, in this mode of being, linear space-time, we're listening for data that can tell us what we're thinking and experiencing and feeling in the moment. And it's all quantitatively driven. So we're disconnected from our bodies. So you understand now how we learn in this process or in this perception. And we can now understand how we listen and what we're listening for to then inform us of the action that we take.
And
So it's how we learn, listen, and then take action.
and anatomy is just the most perfect example of this, how we've cut the body up into its component parts. It's
Yes.
basically the theme of the whole anatomical idea. We scrape away the in between.
Yeah.
We designate and diagnose the action and function of the parts. And then we make the assumption that on returning them to wholeness, which no one's ever done, ever in
No.
history, that they could function as a normal human being.
Yeah, no, this is so important. It's the way science and medicine has deconstructed the wholeness of our human experience into separate, discrete parts.
Yeah.
And even in like biomechanical anatomy, the biomechanics are sequenced and structured in a chronological way in order to get data. That how we move is sequenced in a quantitative, data-driven way. It's how they analyze the body in high-performance sports. You're breaking the parts and the sequence down of every single movement into a highly structured process. That's all linear space-time. So here's the invitation again, is to recognize where we've done that in our own bodies, with our own bodies. There's three primary ways I work with in my coaching. It comes down to three aspects of how your body looks, feels, or function. Looks, feels, or functions. Where have you disconnected, dismissed, disassociated your body? You don't like your body for how it looks, feels, or functions. And when we do that, we disassociate from the wholeness of our human experience. And then we don't like how our body looks. We start to wear clothes that hide or conceal that part of our body. If we don't like how our body feels, we disconnect from it. We don't look at it in the mirror. If we don't like how our body functions, we avoid movements that would put us in a challenging position to actually engage that particular function of our body. So we develop these disassociations and avoidance of our body. This is how we break the wholeness of our body. This is all linear space-time. We literally disconnect and dissociate from that particular space of our body and bring it out of the boundary event we call self. That body part, that body sense, that body function gets pushed out of the space-time boundary of what we call ourself. It's no longer part of me. It's an alien part of me that I don't want any part of. And science and medicine reaffirms this over and over and over.
One of my specialties in my work is working with scoliosis.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big issues is people will come and say, I have scoliosis, as if it's a disease. Now, there are extreme cases of scoliosis, which impinges on the viscera. We know that, but it's rare.
Yeah.
Scoliosis, and I know I'm not telling you this, you know more than I do, is like lordosis or kyphosis. They are names of curves.
Yeah.
Shapes of the spine, ostensibly. And the amount of shame and embarrassment and dis-ease associated, and I don't mean disease because it's not a disease, dis-ease associated with a dismissive comment from some sort of therapist who said, oh, you've got scoliosis, like it's an illness.
Yes.
And I have restored and reintegrated where I found in one instance that I did the rolling test and that person wasn't scoliotic at all. Turned out they played javelin all their lives as a teenager and had a bias to one side.
Right.
I have a colleague who is absolutely brilliant at karate since he was 7 years old. He has a major bias to one side, but he knows it, he loves it, he honors it, and he works with it.
Yes. Yes.
And it's
exactly
his brilliance.
Uh-huh.
And it's such an important piece because when I come across somebody who wants to do yoga but can't because they can't do symmetrical versions of a posture, or they've been ridiculed or shamed, my heart breaks because there's no need.
Exactly. Yes. So again, this is the invitation to recognize through the question, how have we disconnected or dissociated from the wholeness and fullness of our body? And each of us is going to have a different experience of that. How our body looks, feels, or functions. It's one of those three. And then there's a whole story and a chronological time sequence that story inhabits. And that is reinforced in how our body looks, feels, and functions right now. So it's important, get out of the concept, get into your direct experience and start to recognize where you've dissociated and pushed a vital experience of your body outside of the boundary event you call yourself.
Beautiful. So, have we now covered linear time, where space is infinite, time is finite, and we're bound to a way of listening and a way of learning and a way of behaving as to what's next, how many, is it enough?
Yeah, I think this has been a pretty thorough exploration. There is a concept here. In order to understand it, in order to awaken each one of these dimensions in our direct experience, we have to understand the conceptual differences. But once the concept has been understood, then it's the practice and opportunity to drop it into our direct experience and realize which of these space-time dimensions really governs our reality and creates our reality. It's choice point, and it's accessed through the space in between. This is going back to what we were talking about last session, is the opportunities for us to create intentional still points. That's another thing. If you look at the mala bead example again, 100 beads, there's no space in between. They're touching. So it's the space of this experience bleeds into the next space, bleeds into the next experience. There's very little space. So here's where we could maybe start to leave people with practical ways is, can you give yourself more space? You know, we're using space in two different ways here.
Mm-hmm.
The space of the bead is very defined. The space of, okay, we can call that our work life, our family life, our spiritual practices, our diet. Each one of these is a container of experience. It's a container of energy. So it's a discrete space. This isn't the space I'm talking about in the space in between. The space in between is unbounded. So in between these discrete experiences, as we move from work to family, to exercise, to self-care, to learning, these are discrete spaces. The invitation is, and the opportunity is, can you intentionally create a moment of unbounded space where you cultivate curiosity instead of just moving to the next experience and the next experience? You pause. You pause. You take a few deep breaths. Learn to cultivate a sense of curiosity, wonder, awe. What if? Ask yourself the question in this unbounded space. What if? Because in that question, you're also starting to cultivate a different form of listening, which we will talk about in the subsequent podcasts, and a different opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you like a sneak peek or like a movie trailer into the next dimensions of space-time. In linear space-time, the question is, what's next? In cyclical space-time, the question is, what is? And there's an acceptance and an embrace of what is.
Exactly.
Where in linear space-time, there's no acceptance of what is. It's just an annoyance, an inconvenience, frustration.
Shane, that's so brilliant. That cliffhanger right there. Can we start there with our new podcast?
Yep. That would be a good place to start.
I love you.
Love you too. It's been brilliant. Thank you.